Good morning and welcome to another class. Today I have picked up the movie called Beegha Zameen by Bimal Roy. Now this movie is there in your the list of films to watch. Bimal Roy is a very important filmmaker in the 1950s, and his film, this particular film, Beegha Zameen, is a landmark film, considered to be a classic film of its era. And I am trying here to give you a small snapshot of the story itself and also what the director wants to achieve through this particular story. Now, Beegha Zameen, as the name of the film sounds, is about a piece of land. So this is about land. Excuse me. So Bimal Roy makes a story about a piece of land, and he almost surmises the story of our nation in the 1950s and 1960s. So this movie is considered one of the iconic major films made in India in the neo-realist genre. Now, if you understand, neo-realism is a film movement and also a movement in the other fields of creativity, including literature, art, but which neo-realist films started in Italy in the 1940s. And in Italy, post-war Italy, neo-realism films really captured a very niche kind of a storytelling genre. Neo-realist films were more nearer to the reality, as the name suggests. So they would portray the lives of the people in the margins, in the peripheries. They would capture stories which are in the suburbs and not really in the city. The city would be there, but there would also be the suburbs where there is a lot of poverty, where there is a lot of hunger, there is a lot of malnourishment. So neo-realism captured all of these realities, and Bimal Roy's attempt in Beegha Zameen can be classified as a neo-realist attempt at a cinematic storytelling. So this is something Indian filmmakers were also inspired by neo-realist filmmaking style coming out from Italy. So as you understand, so we are talking about a story which is in the margins. So Beegha Zameen is about a story in the margins of the periphery of the poor, and the lead character in such kind of a neo-realist film generally is someone who is at the margins of society, who is struggling to get a job, who is struggling to earn his livelihood, and this lead actor or the protagonist of such a film also is driven by the ideology of his time. He carries a rebellion in his heart. He is somebody because he is somebody who has seen the grains of struggle in society. His life is not smooth. Now, and cinema became one of the most important tools to tell a subaltern story, a peripheral story, a marginal story through the neo-realist filmmaking tradition. Now, as I've already discussed, Beegha Zameen also functions within this genre of neo-realism. So its theme is basically socio-economic conditions of migrant laborers, and they are considered as subalterns in the post-independence era. So migrant laborers have been a very stressing issue in the early part of our post-independence era. If you consider the COVID lockdown in India, you will notice all the story has been about the migrant labor. So some of the stories have remained the same since the 1940s and the 50s. So here we are talking again in the because it functions under the same strictures of a neorealist portrayal of a character. So neorealism in Indian context is talking about a migrant laborer. That's what the director Bimal Roy is trying to do. So who is the migrant laborer? The migrant laborer is somebody who moves from one part of the country to the other, from generally his home to homeland to the away land, generally from his struggle at home to the land, the promised land where he will get prosperity, where he will earn money. So that is the kind of movement that happens with migrant laborers. Migrant laborers generally move in within the confines of the country. They are inland laborers, so they can be considered a kind of a diaspora, an inland diaspora. So a huge chunk of migrant laborers go and settle in some urban center. In the case of this movie, it's Calcutta. So they are socio-economic subalterns. The reason for their movement is always socio-economic reasons. They move because of poverty, for example, or they move because of some other social reasons, which we will see in the movie. So subalterns are excluded from the power sharing agreement that happens in any society. Subalterns are out of this power sharing idea. They are nobodies in their own villages, and that's why they have to leave. So they are at the margins. So migrants actually remain at the periphery. So they don't have any access to power and in turn to wealth or money. So this is one of the reasons that you see migration in such a large number, migration due to socio-economic reasons. The protagonist in this film is played by Balraj Sahani, one of the most promising actors of his time. Now, Balraj Sahani plays the role of a character, Shambhu, a farmer who has to leave his village. He becomes a migrant laborer. And he sets out of his home, sets out of his village, sets out in search of money to bail himself out of a very precarious situation, because he has a debt on his name. He has debt, so he has to go somewhere else to earn money, because in his village he is not able to do so. So the concept of a migrant laborer, the concept of a socio-economic migrant is very much inherent into this, is woven into this story also, the story of the Beegha Zameen. So he has to relieve himself of his debt. He has to pay somebody back. He has huge money, and if he does not pay back, and in this case it's the village landlord, and if he does not pay back, his land will be taken away by the landlord, and which is very true in most of the cases that we have seen during those times, and probably in current times as well. So the movie is nothing but a commentary, a social commentary of its time upon the fate of what such laborers, migrants, farmers face, and how their lives are intertwined in this vicious circle of loan, debt and credit. So this kind of a story actually that Bimal Roy tells in Beegha Zameen captures this the socio-economic situation of the subalterns in a post-independent Indian society. This was what was the situation in the Indian condition. So Shambhu, the character, the lead character played by Balraj Sahani, as I said, he's parents and his forefathers had taken a debt from the village landlord, and they actually mortgaged their piece of agricultural land. That is that Beegha that we have been referring to in the. So Beegha is a bounded land, and that land has been mortgaged to the village landlord. What does the village landlord want is, so he has been getting his interest on his loan, but he has a wish, so that he now wants to establish a factory in the village, and for this he needs Shambhu's land, and he needs more land. So he wants to assimilate this land into his larger dream of having a factory, and thus the Shambhu has to now return the loan somehow, otherwise his land will be taken away by the landlord. So what is it? So the landlord drags him to court, and the court decides that he will have 2 months time to pay back his debt. So this is the whole plot of the story. Now Shambhu has no money to pay, he has 2 months to pay back his debt, and thus he is in a very precarious situation. Otherwise his piece of land will go and he will become landless like many others of the subaltern group. So what does Shambhu decide? Shambhu decides to move to the city, as like many of his subaltern brethren who migrate every year from the villages to the cities in search of better economic prospect. So what does he do? He becomes, and because the city has various ways in which this propensity of the city to provide earning or provide livelihood, so Shambhu becomes a hand-drawn rickshaw puller in the city itself. So the struggle that Shambhu faced in his village actually continues in different forms in the city as well. A rickshaw puller, how much would he earn? So it is not enough to win back his land. So Shambhu's predicament can be easily understood from the fact that finally they have to surrender the land. The land is lost forever and the landlord takes it. So there is this trait of pessimism running throughout the film here, and this is almost metaphoric of the pessimism going around the state of affairs in the 1950s. Actually, if you look at it, the optimism when the country won independence, when India wins independence, there is a lot of optimism in the minds of the people. Finally we are free and there will be prosperity. But this optimism slowly gives way to the pessimism of the 1950s and 60s, because things are not moving as people would have wanted to. There is a lot of corruption, there is a lot of poverty, so there is a lot of scarcity of food. So there are a lot of issues that afflicts the Indian society of the 1950s and the 1960s. So the subaltern Shambhu, who moves to the city, is faced with the dilemma of poverty again. He is in this vicious cycle of poverty and hunger. So he loses his land even though he moves to the city to earn some money. So you have to understand, one of the reasons of a diasporic such subaltern existence is that migration happens from one's land, but it is not always voluntary. The migration that diasporic people do, and in this case inland diaspora as I am calling it, is a forced migration, is not a migration that is voluntary. So this migration is probably because of a lot of social and industrial reasons that increases this pace of migration from the village to the city in this case. If you look at the beginning of the film, you will find that there is a shot of the agricultural field and there are a lot of cracks in the land. It's parched, there is hardly any water. The land needs water from the rain, because then only there will be new. So this parched, bruised land, dusty land, this symbolizes this broken, this bruised homeland, which makes survival unbearable and forces migration. So this is almost, this shot in the film by the director is almost metaphoric to the hardship, to the struggle that the farmer faces in his land, and this forces migration. So there are many ways in which migration is forced for the subalterns, for the people in the periphery. So what does Shambhu do? Because of his forced migration, he is forced to shift borders. He is forced to cross boundaries. He is forced to leave his roots and move into the concrete jungles. So in this process, he moves and crosses boundaries. And where does he go? He goes to the concrete jungles of Calcutta. Now, crossing the border, if you understand, makes him ambivalent and diasporic subjective, because diasporic migration can happen only because of two things. One, because of nostalgia, that you remember the past in a very glowing term, and the other is the forced one. And in case of Shambhu, it is a forced one. It is the crossing of boundary which is forced due to various socio-economic factors. Now, in this city, life is not at all comfortable. The city has its own dynamics. The dynamics of the migrants to the city, the relationship of the migrant to the city is really a complex one. The city is this dream space. You dream about it. You go and you think you will achieve prosperity. It has the potential to change. It has the potential to bring about some kind of a positivity in your life. But it is not always warm to you. Cities also involve struggle. Cities also involve struggling for livelihood. So there is this relationship between the migrant and the city, which we actually have come to at the present. Now I will continue this lecture in the next video.